In this lesson we're going to look at the Earth's atmosphere, and that is the atmosphere today, but also how that has developed from the Earth's early atmosphere. So first of all, we're going to start off with what gases are in today's atmosphere, and we need to make sure we need to know which are the most abundant gases and what percentage of our atmosphere are made up of those gases. So the most abundant gas in our current atmosphere is nitrogen, which makes up 78% of our atmosphere. Now, I don't have a protractor with me, so I'm going to have to do this by eye, so bear with me. So 78%, so it's ever so slightly more than 3/4, so I'm just going to go with that chunk there. So 78% is nitrogen, so this 78% nitrogen gas. The second most abundant gas in our atmosphere is oxygen, which is approximately 21%. And that only leaves us with this tiny portion here for every other gas in the atmosphere. The third most abundant is actually argon, which you should recognize as being one of the noble gases. And the reason why it's quite abundant in the atmosphere is because it is so unreactive and doesn't do anything. So therefore it doesn't go anywhere. And that takes up 0.9% of the atmosphere is argon. So that leaves us with a tiny 0.1%. So all of our atmosphere is basically nitrogen, oxygen and argon apart from 0.1%. And there is a significant gas in there that we need to know. We need to know that 0.04% is carbon dioxide, which means that the remaining 0.06 is all of the other gases, methane, hydrogen, helium, some of the other noble gases, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxides. All of those other gases in the atmosphere only take up 0.06% collectively. So these are the four most abundant gases in our current atmosphere that we need to know about. Now, I'm well aware these don't add up to 100 because you've also got the other trace gases, the other 0.06%. So today's atmosphere, we need to make sure that we know nitrogen, N2, 78%, followed by oxygen, O2, 21%, followed by argon, Ar, 0.9%, followed by carbon dioxide, CO2, 0.04%, and then the other is just other gases, and that is 0.06%. So all the other gases in the atmosphere take up the 0.06%. So the first thing you're going to be asked to do in this topic, number one, learn this. Make sure you know the composition of today's atmosphere. But you need to be able to compare that to the early atmosphere. Now, I'm going to scribble this bit out because actually we can't say for sure what the percentage composition of the early atmosphere was, because we're talking hundreds of millions of years ago, long before humans existed, long before any life on Earth. So there's no conclusive evidence of what the atmospheric composition was like 500 million years ago, for example. Now, that's not to say that there isn't evidence. That's quite different. There is lots of evidence that leads us to be quite sure as to what the atmospheric composition was like, but there is not enough conclusive evidence. And that's how scientific method works. If there's more evidence to support something, or new evidence to support an alternative theory, then the scientific understanding changes. I mean, we've done the development of the atomic model. Originally they had the plum pudding model, and then the alpha scattering experiment didn't support that model, so the model changed, and that's how scientific understanding, develops. So if something is understood in the scientific community, but we don't have conclusive evidence for it, that's not to say that there isn't evidence. And if there were evidence to contradict that, then the scientific understanding would change. So what we do know, so importantly, you're going to be asked, why can we not be sure? Why can we not say with 100% certainty this was the composition? Well, there is not enough evidence. Now, that's not the same as saying there's no evidence, just that there's not enough. But what evidence do we have? Okay, so we have, importantly, we have samples of air from various time periods trapped in ice cores that have been, dug up and analysed. The problem is you can't analyse the air inside a bubble that's been locked in ice for hundreds of millions of years and assume that that's identical to the composition of the gases in the atmosphere. That's quite a jump, but those core samples that we have do seem to support the idea that the early atmosphere had lots of carbon dioxide, very little oxygen, for example. We can look at the rocks, the geology of the planet, and we can see very clearly that the early Earth was very, very volcanic. And we know exactly which gases volcanoes are putting into the atmosphere. So you'd imagine if the Earth was very volcanic, almost the entire surface of the Earth was volcanic at some point, then that there stands to reason there would have been a lot of carbon dioxide, a lot of water vapor, a lot of methane, a lot of ammonia in the atmosphere, and that would have been coming from those volcanoes. And we can also compare the early Earth to other planets in our solar system, which have similar, take Mars for example, also a very volcanic planet. Mars has a huge amount of carbon dioxide in its atmosphere. So all of this evidence tends to suggest that there was a lot of CO2 in our early atmosphere, but very, very little oxygen. So you're going to see contradicting figures. There's going to be exam questions that say one thing, there's going to be textbooks that say another. They're all going to be roughly in the same ballpark. They're going to say lots of carbon dioxide, very little oxygen, if any. But they will vary on these specific numbers, and that's purely because there is, like I said, not enough conclusive evidence. Everything is based on assumptions and models and comparisons, so we don't know for sure what the exact figures were. But we did know that the main gas was most likely carbon dioxide. We think it was probably about 90%, so approximately 90%. Everything else we're not really sure about, but there should have been a reasonable amount of ammonia, because ammonia is given off by volcanoes, and we know that the early Earth was very, very volcanic. We know that there was probably quite a lot of water vapor. Again, we know that volcanoes give off a lot of water vapor. We also know that the early Earth was very, very hot, and that there was no liquid water. So where was that water most likely? Well, it was most likely in the atmosphere as water vapor. So carbon dioxide, ammonia, water vapor, and then I'm just going to put other gases, because there would have been other gases present. And all of that would have been approximately the other 10%. So the first thing they're going to ask you is to compare today's atmosphere to the early atmosphere and talk about how it has changed. Okay, so let's have a quick look at this graph, and I've already done the axes to make life a bit quicker. So we're just going to plot the carbon dioxide. I'm going to do the carbon dioxide in red, and we'll see how it changed from the early atmosphere. So from 90 to 40, so it's already dropping pretty rapidly, to 21, to 15, to 10, to 7, 5, 2, 1, and then we're at the 0.035 or the 0.04. Okay, so there's our carbon dioxide. Huge decrease, really steep decrease. So if we try and I'll do my best here. Okay, and then let's have a look at the oxygen next. I'll do that one in blue. Ooh. So it was 0, 0, 0.5, 1, 5, 10, 18, 20, 21. So let's draw that trend. So no oxygen, no oxygen, no oxygen. Then it started to increase, then stabilized at about 21%. So it's gone from 0% to 21%. Carbon dioxide has gone from 90% to 0.035%. Massive decrease. And then we'll do the nitrogen. I'll do the nitrogen in black. So starting at 10, 25, 40, 50, 60, 70, 75, so slowing down a bit now, 78. So again, we're seeing a gradual increase, leveling out at about 78. So it's gone from approximately 10% to 78%. Now again, I'm aware that does not match exactly what I said on the previous page, and again that's because we do not know for certain. So, you know, these are all models and predictions, but what we can see and what we all agree on, whether the starting numbers are the same or not, is that there's a large amount of carbon dioxide which has decreased to today's atmosphere. The nitrogen has increased until today's atmosphere. The oxygen has increased until today's atmosphere. So you need to know these trends, you need to know that they've changed, but you need to know how they've changed and the processes that have caused those changes. So we're going to flow map what has happened. So first things first, you know, where did these gases come from? So the early Earth, or the early atmosphere, is very volcanic. Therefore, there is a lot of carbon dioxide, ammonia, and water vapor. So, very volcanic, CO2, ammonia, water vapor. So what changed? Well, fundamentally, the Earth cooled down. So the Earth became less volcanic, and cooled down. The water vapor condensed to form the oceans. So that's our first fundamental change. The Earth is cooled, the water vapor condenses, and it forms the oceans. So that's dealt with the water vapor. There would have been lots and lots of water vapor in the atmosphere, in the early atmosphere, and there's very little now because the Earth cooled down and all of that water vapor condensed to form the oceans. So what happened next? Large amounts of carbon dioxide dissolve into the oceans. So that's quite a significant change. And if we go back to the look at our graph here, we can see our CO2 is dropping long before the oxygen is increasing. Now, you should be able to draw a correlation between that. Well, if carbon dioxide is decreasing and oxygen is increasing, the most logical thing there is perhaps photosynthesis. Maybe plants are turning that carbon dioxide into oxygen. But it's important to remember that there is no life on Earth at this early point. Life has not evolved yet. And you can see that the CO2 is dropping long before the oxygen starts to increase. So photosynthesis isn't happening until about here. By that point, the carbon dioxide has already dropped from 90% to 15%. So where did that carbon dioxide go before photosynthesis was an issue or a process that existed? Well, it's dissolved into the oceans. So the mistake people make is they think that photosynthesis is the main reason carbon dioxide decreased, and it's not. The main reason the carbon dioxide decreased is because it dissolved into the oceans. So, large amounts of CO2 dissolve into the oceans. And now we can start talking about life starting to evolve. Okay, so when we're talking about life, we're not talking about dinosaurs, we're not talking about trees, we're talking about microscopic, very, very simple single cellular life. Okay, so simple bacteria evolve, which convert ammonia, which is NH3, into nitrogen, which is N2. So simple bacteria evolve, convert ammonia into nitrogen. And now we've got simple life, we're going to get simple plants. So simple plant organisms evolve. And we're talking very, very simple things like plankton. So simple plant organisms evolve and use photosynthesis to convert carbon dioxide into oxygen. So we've now talked about how our water vapor decreased because it condensed when the Earth cooled down. We've talked about how our CO2 has decreased because it's condensed into the oceans and been used by simple plants in photosynthesis. We've talked about how the ammonia decreased because it was converted into nitrogen by simple bacteria. And also we've talked about how oxygen has increased as a product of photosynthesis and how nitrogen has increased by the bacteria converting the ammonia. And we've also established that our early atmospheric gases came from the volcanic activity. So we've very simply here described how the Earth's atmosphere has developed over the millions of years, hundreds of millions of years. So again here, discuss your confidence of this theory of Earth's changing atmosphere and why we cannot be 100% certain this is what happened. Okay, so there isn't enough conclusive, and that's the important thing. It's about not that there's not evidence, just that there isn't conclusive evidence to be able to state with absolute certainty the composition of the early atmosphere. But there is sufficient evidence to support these theories. So make sure you've got all of that down then, and what you can then do is have a go at this exam question.